here we are again. Let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? This is Sean of Raw Select Music, and today I want to get into my honorable mentions of 2019. Although I made a pact with myself early at the beginning of the year that I wouldn't try to stay as up-to-date on all the releases that were coming out in 2019, I ended up breaking that promise to myself pretty early on and ended up buying way too many records from this year. And overall, as a year, I think 2018 and 2019 were just about even. I feel like there were actually quite a bit more memorable releases this year than in comparison to 2018. Although the one major difference I think this year was, rather than jumping all over the place, going to a lot of familiar names and a lot of new faces, I think I ended up sticking largely within the realm of hip-hop. And actually, I think this is the most hip-hop that I bought in a year in a really, really long time. And overall, I feel like the releases this year were pretty strong. Some of them aren't probably gonna stick out in my memory as much as some of the releases of 2018, but overall I feel like 2019 was a pretty strong year, and as such I have a whole host of records that I want to share with you that either just barely missed out on my top 10 favorite list, which will be the next video, or were records that I still thought were good and were worth giving a shout out to. So I have a pretty good stack of records right here that I want to talk about, so I'm not going to waste any more time with an introduction, and let's just jump into it. So right on top, we have Hubba Bubba Babble Tape, which is a beat tape with Yotaro and Armu2, two of my favorite Japanese beat makers. I dug this album at the beginning of the year, but over time, I think it just sort of faded into the background, and I think that's ultimately my sort of complaint with this record. It's not a bad record per se, but it does feel like it's sort of lacking in special quality that really stands out in my mind. While it does have one of my favorite tracks of this year, Vapor. I really dig this song, and I really like the smoky, laid-back atmosphere of this really sluggish track. I feel like overall the tracks on here do tend to blend together a little bit. I do still enjoy the vibe of this record, and I do like throwing it on from time to time. And I gotta say, if you're just looking for some good lo-fi background instrumental hip-hop, yo, Hubba Bubba wasn't a bad release, and it's definitely worth at least listening to. Getting into another instrumental hip-hop release, we have Bonus Level DiBiase's Video Game Beat Tape. I really do like this record, and the only reason it didn't end up making it onto my top 10 is honestly that there are just other records that I like more than it. But I love DiBiase's chops on here. There's some real bangers on here, specifically Dragon Knuckles, the track that leads off the B-side, and I really like his chops on here. This is a record that I still enjoy going back to, and I still really enjoy picking out all the different video game samples, how masterfully he does the chopping on them, and I really like the drums. I really like how DiBiase actually uses a lot of other less obvious samples as part of like his drum kit on a lot of the tracks on here, and I really like the way that it just sort of moves from track to track and actually ends up becoming more of an album listen rather than just a straight up beat tape. So if you haven't checked this one out and if you're looking for some really good video game inspired hip hop, yeah, definitely can't go wrong with this one. It is definitely one of my favorite instrumental hip-hop releases of this year. Next up, we have a record that I picked up at the end of the year that really caught me by surprise. This is S3A Pages from Dirt Crew Records. This was a record that I really didn't think that much of when I picked it up. It just sounded like some really good deep house with some live instrumentation. And more or less, that's exactly what I got, and I really enjoy this record. The tracks that are more band-focused have a nice flow to them, and there's a nice band interplay going on in it. There's not really a lot of technical flourishes on here, but what it lacks in that, there's plenty of groove, there's plenty of dance floor moments to it, and there are a few instances of musical showmanship that actually do make this record really cool. One of the tracks on here, the C-side, joint number 5, breaks away from the deep house inspired stuff and goes into straight up live drum and bass. And it's actually one of my favorite moments on this track, and it really caught me off guard. Overall, I really like this record. I think the deep house tracks are really good, and there's definitely stuff that I can play out on here. It's actually a deep house record that I enjoy listening to because I like a lot of the texture, and it's honestly just sort of a fun record to listen to. The only reason that it didn't make it onto the top 10 is I just think there are other records stronger than this one, but that doesn't take away from the overall quality of this. So if you're looking for some good background deep house music with a bit of a jazz overtone to it with some live instrumentation, yeah, this one's definitely worth checking out. An early pickup from this year, Melody's Infamy, A Journey to You. This album still has one of my favorite tracks on here, Ao Longo do Rio. The Brazilian-inspired groove on here combined with some really laid-back hip-hop drums on it that really have this snap and atmosphere remains one of my favorite tracks of this year. And overall, I really like what Melody's Infamy did on here. It seemed like there was a lot more focus on live instrumentation rather than just straight-up samples. It's a totally chill, totally laid-back record, but still snaps where it has to. There are still a few moments on here that'll get your neck snapping. And there are also some really cool broken beat tracks on here that mix the vibe up. There's also a really cool mid-tempo boogie track on here as well. And only reason it didn't make it onto the top 10 is I just feel like there was stronger records than this one. But that being said, doesn't take away from the quality of the tracks on here. Some of the best chilled out, laid back music on here. Super good sunny vibes. Maybe not the best record for December, but once summer rolls around, I want to pull this one out. Another one from a Japanese beat maker, we have Ilmore Pure. I picked this up from the strength of the B-side track here, Amie, which I really liked the vocal chop and guitar chop on that track, as well as having some really hard-hitting drums. And this is probably, of all the records that I've picked up recently, I've listened to the least, but I do enjoy a lot of the music on here. There's definitely a sort of laid-back vibe to it, not too dissimilar from the Melody's Infamy, but this seems to go in much more of a Japanese direction. There seems to be a little bit of an element of Japanese pop to it, which is really, really cool. I really like his melodic sensibility, but I really like the way that his drums hit as well, and there's enough variety in the way that he makes his tracks that I really enjoy listening to this record. Definitely one that I want to listen to more, and definitely one that I want to give more detailed thoughts and opinions of at some point, but even from the few times that I've listened to it since I've picked it up, I think it's worth giving a shout out to, and definitely think that you should give it a listen. Alright, getting into the last of my early on pickups from this year, we got 25 Nights for Nujabes from Taku. I dig this record. I think Taku absolutely nailed the aesthetic of Nujabes' music while putting his own spin on it. There's some more J Dilla style slap tracks on here, and I really like what Taku did in terms of celebrating Nujabes' music. There's a lot of contemplative meditativeness and a lot of emotional punch that comes with a lot of these tracks. Ultimately though, I think it ended up not getting on to my top 10 because I think there were more creative instrumental hip-hop projects out there, but that doesn't take away from the overall enjoyment on it. The drums on here hit when they have to. The atmosphere is great. It's a fairly emotional listen, but it's one where if I'm in the right mood for it, it hits perfectly, and it's definitely a record, especially if you're a fan of Nujabes but want to hear it with a little bit of a different twist to it. This is one you're not going to want to sleep on. Alright, getting into my final four. Some of these might be a little bit controversial, so I'm gonna get this one out of the bag right now, and that's Freddie Gibbs and Bandana. I really like this record. I think Freddie Gibbs is in top form on this record, as is Madlib. I think this is some of Madlib's best beats, and I think this is some of Freddie Gibbs's best performances overall. But ultimately, I just found that there were stronger hip-hop projects this year, which I'll get into in my top 10, and I found that I ended up listening to those records more than this one. It's not to say that this is a bad record by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely not, although it might be one of the worst pressed records of this year, something that I wanted to talk about in my review. The recording quality of this record is all over the place, with one track, my favorite on here, Education, being borderline unplayable, is really, really frustrating. I really wish they had pressed this on 2LP, but that being said, I can still look past it because the quality of the music is still really, really high on here. I do think that Freddie Gibbs's gangsta shtick gets a little bit played laid out, but still, I find that there are lines that I come back to. I feel like Freddie Gibbs's performance on this record is absolutely top-notch, and I definitely look forward to hearing more music from these guys. Ultimately, it just came down to, in a year where I ended up buying a lot of hip-hop records, this one stands out the least in comparison to the other two that I want to talk about later on. That being said, definitely give this one a listen. Alright, let's get that other one out of the way. This one, Anderson .Paak Ventura, was a record that I was really looking forward to, and while I don't think I've grown tired of it, I just haven't been listening to it that much anymore. That being said, I do feel like this is still some of Anderson .Paak's best material. I feel like the A side on this record is basically untouchable, all the way from Come Home to Good Heels. All the songs on here are great. I love the fact that Anderson .Paak has been going back into more of his Malibu style and stretching out into not only the neo-soul and hip-hop stuff, but even getting into some house and new disco and dance stuff, sort of like from his Venice days. And I sort of like the overall sort of calmer and more mature feel of this record. It doesn't seem like Anderson is doing as much of the braggadocio players sort of stuff, but even when he does, it's still not tired. I just feel like in comparison to a record like Malibu, it doesn't seem quite as colorful, and I feel like the record cover in and of itself is pretty indicative of the actual sound on this record, which isn't bad, but ultimately I do still find myself preferring Malibu. I still think that that record has the majority of the stronger tracks, and I think that's ultimately why it doesn't quite make it to the top 10. But that being said, I still really enjoy this record, still really recommend that you pick it up if you haven't already, and still think that it is a nice complementary piece to all of Anderson .Paak's other records, and I do look forward to hearing what he does in the future. This one surprised me because I really thought it was going to end up in my top 10, but this year Kiefer doesn't make it onto the list, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think that this is Kiefer's strongest album to date. I really like the fact that he's sort of stretching himself out and taking on some other directions while still sort of rooting his sound in instrumental hip-hop with jazz flourishes thrown in. I think Kiefer's playing sounds more confident than ever. His sense of melody sounds even stronger than before, and I think the different synth textures that he's added on this record have made it Kiefer's best project to date. Ultimately though, I feel like there were just other projects that I liked more than this one, and considering that I also picked it up so late in the year, it just sort of got overshadowed by records that I was already in love with at the beginning of this year, and ultimately quite as strong of an impact as some of his previous records. That doesn't take away from the quality of the music on here, like I've said with a lot of the records in this video, and overall I definitely still think that it is a solid addition to anyone who's a fan of Kiefer, and I look forward to checking out anything that he puts out in the future. It probably in a different year would have made it onto my top 10 list, but it's just gonna have to get an honorable mention, but it's still a strong recommendation nonetheless. And finally, this one pains me, but I am taking this one out of my top 10 list strictly because it is a collection, basically a best of. It's not really an album, and this hurts me because it is easily one of my favorite records of this year, and that's Stro Elliott's Moods EP. If you haven't already watched my review of this record, I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is a collection of some of Stro Elliott's strongest tracks. There is not a weak moment on this thing from front to back. Every single song on here absolutely slaps. Stro Elliott and House Shoes have collected some of his best material to date. Can't recommend this record enough. If you haven't picked it up already, grab this because this is my instrumental hip-hop record of the year, except for the fact it's a best of, more or less, and I feel like I should disqualify it for that very reason. But if I were to give any record an honorary best of the year record, it would go to Stro Elliott, and even with my best of video still coming later, I can't recommend this one enough, and it might just be my favorite record of 2019. So that's gonna be it for me today, guys. Thanks as always for watching. If you've checked out any of the records in this video, please let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. If you want to check out any of these records for yourself, I'll be posting audio links to my WordPress and Steemit blogs. And as always, please head over to my Mixcloud. Links to everything, as always, down in the description. So that's gonna be it for me today, guys. Thanks as always for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. So until then, peace out!